For sticking around. It was a good idea. I'd like for everybody to just join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage. We have Julie Parker Bonello, producer of the film, and Rebecca Ruan O'Shaughnessy, Senior Project Manager of Economic Advancement Strategies at Jobs for the Future, and who is featured in the film. And Susan Sachin, Campaign Director for the California Labor Federation. So Rebecca, hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Let's begin with you. Could you tell us a little bit about being approached by the filmmakers to participate in this film, and was it ultimately anything like you expected it to be?
Sure. So just a little bit of my background. So prior to Fuyao, I was an economic developer with the state of Ohio. I became the first U.S. employee for the company. So I have various roles. One of them is kind of be the community liaison for the company. So we were approached by the Regional Economic Development Coalition. They told us about Julie and Steve and their work about the last truck, and then kind of talked about whether or not we're interested in making, at that time we call it the first glass. And obviously we Googled Julie and Steve, watched the film, and made the recommendation to the chairman. He approved it fairly quickly. Kind of my personal kind of take on that, potentially 3 reasons. One is he really personally believes in transparency. Secondly, he has a lot of confidence in this project in the U.S. And third is I think he feels personally responsible in kind of establishing a healthier U.S. and China relations. So I think those are the 3 kind of factors. I didn't know what to expect about the film, to be honest. There were times where I was mic'd all day. There were so many things were happening. I didn't know what they were going with it. I did leave the company midway through filming. Obviously, I saw the union organizing effort, and I knew that was going to be one of the major storylines in the film. The one thing that I didn't kind of expect was how funny the film ended up being, and also how personally therapeutic it has been for me.
Thank you. Julie, what was it that compelled you to produce this film?
So let's see. So I started a company called Chicken and Egg Pictures that supports women documentary filmmakers, including Nico over here. And Julia Reichert, one of the filmmakers, was nominated for our Chicken and Egg Award, which goes to a mid-career filmmaker. And so I had the great pleasure of seeing 10 minutes of footage for her Chicken and Egg nomination. And so I saw 10 minutes of the chairman in the factory and talking to the scene when he's coming down the staircase talking to workers. And I could not stop thinking about the footage and the film. And so I approached Julie and Steve and said, I'd love to help you with the film. I'd love to help you produce it. I'd love to help you raise financing. I just feel that this story is in the zeitgeist in the moment, around workers, the future of work, China-U.S. relations. It just touched on automation, so many topics, and they're masterful storytellers, as I think you can see from this film. And so I just said, put me to work. I want to help you produce this movie.
Well, that's a dream come true. Susan, we witness an effort to unionize for better working conditions in the film. How does that speak to your work with the California Labor Federation, especially given that the current challenge is more about worker rights in the gig economy than manufacturing?
I'm pretty emotional right now, just seeing this for the first time. I must admit, I come from a blue-collar family in the Midwest who were devastated when all the plants shut down in the 80s, and I saw my own family, members who either had to retire early or could never work again because of their age, and have just come to love. And what sparked me in the film, just a few thoughts, was seeing the hope that people took these jobs with, and wanting to create a new life and being given a second chance and having hope for what this could mean for their families and for themselves. And then you just see all the dynamics that occur and what, especially we experience so much in the workforce today, where workers feel they have no voice. Voice was the big word used on the management side, is to end your voice. And what the distortion that has taken place in so many, both organizing campaigns, but certainly in this country, of what a union really is. It's just really about workers working together, feeling like they have a say in their job. You go into any workplace, and you shouldn't have to give up your rights to have a say about the things that affect you in one of the most important things you do in your life, and that's to earn an income. And that's just what happens in so many situations, and we've seen so many of these, the courage, the incredible courage of working people and the absolute, what happens to people in their lives. And we see this in California today with immigrant workers especially. We've had some amazing campaigns in the Silicon Valley that have been successful, but mostly with contracted out workers. But so many who have gone through these campaigns being threatened, going into work every day, not knowing what's going to happen to them, if it will be their last day at work, or just feeling the harassment and intimidation that they feel. By far more vicious management than this. This was pretty low key compared to what goes on in some organizing campaigns and in some workplaces, especially with immigrant workers fearing both deportation or worse things of losing their families. So lots of things are going through my mind right now, but I so appreciate the way in which this was put together and forcing us all to think about the future of work, especially at the end, as people were just being, fired, laid off, whatever, because mechanization was taking over. And as we see the changing nature of work around here with independent contractors and people who have really aren't even considered workers anymore. They're on their own. They're being left to fend for themselves. Sorry, that was so long.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you. Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit about Jobs for the Future and with automation and new machine learning, what this means for workers who will be left behind?
Sure. So I work for this national nonprofit called Jobs for the Future, focusing on really economic advancement through education and workforce. I work out of our Oakland office. Obviously, it's very California focused. It's really looking at kind of improving economic and social mobility outcomes for Californians, right? So in terms of future work, future of learning, there are various explanations, literatures out there describing it. The one that resonates with me the most is if you look at jobs, they're jobs, and actually it's not really jobs, it's like tasks. Tasks, they're uniquely human, so creativity, analytical thinking, and those are still uniquely human. Now, in terms of corporate behaviors and this kind of profit-driven kind of motive, right, an incentive, any tasks that can be kind of isolated with a concrete beginning and an end, if it's not within the company's core competency, they're farming it out. So then you just have tiers and tiers of contracting work. Every company just is building on their core competency and just farming out the rest, right? So all of them, and then if you look at them, the profit margin gets slimmer and slimmer, right? The lower you are in that hierarchy, the less, that the company's making, and then as a result, right, you see a lot more of eroding of fundamental kind of, labor rights. And then there's another framework of, like, if you have a task that's super repetitive and then the outcome is quantifiable, then you go into automation. You create an arm that does that simple repetitive work. Then the machine can take care of it. And where is the vulnerable population lays? They either lay in the bottom of that atomization, the contracting, or they're actually on the bottom of the machine. So basically, the things that are too expensive for the machines to do, that's where the vulnerable population comes in. So even you see the workplace injury, now a lot of the injuries are not like the injuries we see 70 years ago. Now it's a lot of the repetitive injuries. So what the company is doing, as a matter of fact, is kind of, the joke is they're trying to make humans robots. So the humans are competing with robots, and guess what? Humans lose in that kind of robotic movements, right? So you see in the value chain, basically vulnerable populations on the bottom. So they have no pathways to upward progression, right? They have no negotiation power in a way, right? Because they provide lower value in the company, so they could be easily replaced. So it's a harder, just the whole ecosystem is very, very difficult for the vulnerable population to really get their voice to kind of raise above. So a lot of the solution is really thinking about how do you also through education, through enabling conditions, allow these folks to reskill and upskill so then they can rise above the robots, so then they're not in that difficult situation.
Wow.
I get to think now.
The future. Susan, you've mentioned that the social contract in this country is really broken in the new gig economy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we really all just need to address, I mean, we know we have incredible political challenges in this country, but the fundamental nature of what we're about is that people have the right to have a living, security, raise their families, what can we think about living a life in peace in these day and times? But that, I think back to even, we may be sitting in one of the New Deal era theaters, given what's around us, that, when Roosevelt started the New Deal and when workers like my dad came back from World War II, they had a job. They had a job for life. My dad had a job for life. They had health insurance. They had retirement. They had a wage that they kept building on because they were part of unions. And that was considered a relationship, that there was a relationship at the time. And, the challenge that has come to just continue on the ever-ending path to, wages and for profits and excess, the excesses in the corporate structure of CEO pay and what's become that we've accepted or that this country has been willing to kind of feel powerless to really change is really what's so horrifying. And this is, I think, what we feel driven to do and to keep addressing, that we have got to do something to stop and draw a line on what's going on right now of the endless profits at the expense of working people. And that's why we had the election outcome that we did, because most of our elected leaders don't take on Wall Street. They don't take on the, a fair wage, fair profits, share the wealth kind of approach in a serious way to really implement it. And I think we're really headed, especially with young people who see a new job in some of the, the gig work. Every 6 months, it's a new job at low wages. If anyone's driven, I don't want to just keep highlighting the challenges, but I was on 580 driving out in rush hour traffic, 2 hours to Tracy a couple nights ago, and people do that every day. They commute that every day. But there is also a lot of hope, because there are a lot of incredible activists and workers that are organizing in different areas. In Silicon Valley, it was an amazing campaign of security officers. If I could just really tie this in for just a minute. We took on Apple with their unions, the Service Employees Union. These are the workers really organizing this to hire responsible contractors and to find new ways to organize, because the companies really do go after people, and the things you saw in there, threatening to close the plant, move the plant, fire workers, really does happen repeatedly. But the workers organized, Apple hired responsible contractors, 4,000 security officers, and I remember one of the security officers, when they got their first contract just last year, she said at the big meeting that they were having, this was actually maybe a little bit later, but she said this was going to be the first time that she was going to be able in 3 years to move out of her car and into a small apartment that she could afford with the raise that she got. And, what can you say to that? That this is all someone is asking is to have a small enough place that they can, move out of their car. But that campaign gave rise to food service workers organizing, and all the Google bus drivers and Apple bus drivers and all that are organizing, leading to Silicon Valley Rising. And I think this is what we kind of hope to see in more places, where people begin to work together and find ways that they can use their collective energy to find hope to make changes.
Thank you, Susan. I'd like to add one thing. I think what's so kind of revealing about this film is also the scenes that take place in China, and seeing the Chinese workers working so hard, such long hours, away from home, away from their children, 1 day off a month, and the huge sacrifices, including Wang, the furnace worker in Dayton who has left his family behind for 2 years, and then they finally, join him at the end of the movie. So I think, one of the things that Julia Reichert, who's made lots of films about worker rights and labor rights over the course of her 50 years of filmmaking, is this idea of worker solidarity around the world. And obviously we live in a much more globalized world than we did, 30, 40, or when your father was working. And so whereas wages have gone up in China, they've come down in the US. And I guess one of the questions that crosses my mind is, will workers in China, if they see this film and sort of start demanding more rights for themselves? And so anyway, I just think it's important to put us in context also globally in terms of, the world is a different place than it was 50 years ago.
No, it's true in Foxconn, in southern China, and the workers actually committed suicide because the conditions were so bad there.
And I think Foxconn is having a project in Wisconsin, right? So, and I think Taiwan has an event for Julia and Steve. I think has invited them to go. So that's all. And Foxconn's headquartered in Taiwan. So this all kind of, I feel like, is a full circle to have those conversations.
Thank you for that context. I'd like to be able to open it up to the audience for any final questions, but before we do, if I could hear from each of you what you think, the most important things that we walk away from this film with are. What would you like to see audience members do as a result of seeing this film, or think about?
Gosh, well, there's so many threads in this film. This film will be released on Netflix a month on August 21st. And Participant Media is also behind the film that does great social impact campaigns. So there will be a digital hub at AmericanFactoryFilm.com, and there'll be curriculum and take action. That's all being sort of formulated as we speak. But I'm going to turn that over to Susan, because I think there's an immediate bill pending up in Sacramento around gig economy workers and this idea of independent contractors. So that's one kind of local, immediate
just addressing
take
the
action.
film also, that is so important for us to reach across so many bridges to understand and meet people. It feels like sometimes we're in our narrow lane, and we really don't take the time to understand a little bit deeper what people are thinking or where they're coming from. So I appreciate that just in our efforts to really change this country as well. But last year, there was an amazing California State Supreme Court decision that defined what workers are, that people who are considered now independent contractors, the most probably glaring examples are like Uber and Lyft drivers who have been hired as, quote, independent contractors are not independent contractors. That the Supreme Court defined this ABC test that said you have to be really independent. You have to have your own business kind of situation. None of the folks who are, and more companies are going to this kind of model. Grocery deliveries. There's all kinds of things where people you're just told you're on your own and you're an independent contractor. And so outside on the table, you'll see a flyer, but if you're considered an independent contractor right now, you get no workers' comp. One of our staff, his father's a truck driver. He was injured on the job. He's injured and has no workers' compensation or sick pay. He's on his own now. Don't have to be paid minimum wage. No sick days, no paid family leave, no unemployment benefits, no right to organize for sure, no Social Security. All of these things that many people have fought so hard for. And so we have a bill now to try and set this into laws so that it can really be enforced in a better way and workers will have some rights. It's called AB 5, and we're really asking everyone, the flyers are out there, but to call your state senator right now. It's passed through the state assembly, and we're trying to get all of the state senate to pass it, and then hopefully to be passed later this summer and signed by the governor. This would be precedent setting. This would give so many individuals out there the right to be part of something where, one, they will have more rights and protections, but also that they have the right to form together to make sure that they have a voice in the things that are affecting them. And this is millions and millions of workers, and you can imagine that Uber and Lyft and all the major corporations are fighting this tooth and nail. So we would appreciate all support we can get to talk to your senators.
Thank you. Anything either of you would add to that?
Yeah, so for me, I'm just kind of thinking about really, education is really important. It's really like, it's a lifelong learning, right? It's not just in our community colleges or high schools or colleges. I have changed careers across different industries because I have actively tried to learn. I have the resources to learn. I have the time to learn. I have the money to learn, right? Most of the vulnerable populations don't. The cost of learning for them is extremely high. Those folks, you can see the struggle in the film of Chinese management trying to train and not really understanding how, and not really, frankly, have the support system. So how do we really work together through companies, through government, through labor unions, through other organizations to support it, so then we can really, kind of go back to, right, be a good human, not a bad robot. How do we really go above that and really bring that upward mobility, empower ourselves to learn?
Do we have questions from the audience?
I'll come to you with this mic. Stand by.
Please do wait for the microphone. It's a large space.
I'm running, I promise. Okay.
I thought I heard a campaign slogan towards the end in support of the No campaign saying, "Make America Great Again." Is that right? I think it was. In any event, I was just wondering, given that, and since we've heard that slogan from other quarters, is there any evidence that the Trump was in any way supportive of the No campaign?
Well, I think. No, to my knowledge. I actually had a conversation this morning with my coworker about that phrase used by Jeff. He spent the past 10 years in China. So when he got this job, he moved from China to here. So I think, as much as my personal opinion, that he is bicultural, I think he doesn't necessarily understand the sensitivity around phrases like that. So in his mind, or in a very typical Chinese mind, something coming from the president represents a popular view, represents authority, represents something that you can mobilize around. So that is my interpretation of that usage there. And of course, I'm doing this when he said that, but.
We have a question right back, center, house, right. That might not be true.
Hi, I saw the film at the International Film Festival, and it's changed a little bit since then. And at the time, the filmmakers were there, and somebody had asked if the chairman had seen it, and they weren't able to show it to him before. So I was wondering, I don't know if any of you guys would know this, if A, he saw the film and what he thought of it, but also if he saw it, that version or this version, because they're different versions a little bit.
I can speak to that. So a couple of scenes, it was a little long coming out of Sundance and at the SF International, so a couple scenes have been trimmed here or there. But that was at the filmmaker's discretion. The company had no input into that regard. The chairman has seen the film. Steve Bogner, the filmmaker, showed it to him, I believe it was in the last month, fairly recently. And I think overall he likes the film, and he thinks the storytelling and filmmaking and just the sort of documentation of Fuyao Glass America and the startup and how the company has rolled out in the United States is interesting. I think there are one or two scenes he might like to tweak, but the thing with being an independent documentary filmmaker is that you make a film and you get releases from your characters, and so I think this is the film that you'll see on Netflix in a month's time.
You have a question, back house right on the aisle.
Hi, wonderful film, and I actually work as a substitute teacher in Oakland, and I'm part of the union in Oakland, and I was also elected to go up to Sacramento, to the Alameda Labor Council, and went up to Sacramento for AB 5.
Lobby day last week? Yay.
Yes.
Yay!
And I'm also going to a union workshop on on organizing and knowing the contract. So, hopefully you can get it shown more places.
Well, it will be, if you have a Netflix subscription, it will be available to 150 million people pretty soon in a month. And then there also will be, as I mentioned, that digital hub where there'll be opportunities to do educational screenings, and there'll be digital downloads for curriculum to go along with the film. So there will be a robust impact campaign that goes along with the film.
If I could divert for just a minute, but also just thinking of the amazing inspiration we've drawn from the teacher strikes all over the country, including Oakland and LA, and the work that you're doing, and all the teachers across the country who really are trying to make education a more important and a relevant thing in their kids' lives, and lack so few resources to do it. So I just think it's such an important change in this country that teachers are stepping up and standing out and really trying to do something significant to open their kids' eyes.
You have a question, house right toward the center.
So it's actually two questions. One is, I felt like the decision was made not to follow the environment. There were a couple of places, both the chairman's comments and also one worker commenting about the disposal of toxic waste. And I wonder why the filmmakers chose not to pursue that a little bit, whether it was just time or, because it sort of seemed like they were gonna pursue that line and then it just didn't happen. So that's one question I have. And also my second question is, how has it gone since this film was made? Like, as they peel away more and more people for different reasons, has the effort to unionize risen again? And is it continuing to be that balance of the union threatens to come in and then that pushes the company to do something different with the workers?
The first one on the environmental toxic, I think just my sense is, and I'd have to corroborate this with the filmmakers, that there were just so many threads to follow in the film that that just was less pronounced than many others. In terms of the union and what's happening now, are you familiar what's going on with Fuyao?
I mean,
now?
Hearsay, quadruple hearsay. But I think after that, the company's making money, right? But then there was also a death, right? After it was work related, but I don't know enough about the facts to really comment more on that. I think in terms of union organization, they have a time frame that they can't really come back and actively campaign. So that was last time I kind of heard about it. But I think internally from a management perspective, at least it was their intention to kind of obviously need to, in terms of union avoidance, need to kind of keep kind of really looking at management and looking at management behavior, how to kind of avoid that in the long term, right? And that's fairly common in the auto industry, so.
And the threat of plant closures in some of these devastated communities is just so powerful when management says, and you heard some of the workers say they were pulled in 1 and 2 and 3 times, and that just goes on a continuous basis. But if we have to and they make it such a third party, and it's so many lies, like you can never talk to us again if you vote to have a union, and it really is, and we know that isn't true, but in communities where there just really is no other work, the thought of plant closings is one of the most significant threats that companies put out there, and so many plants have closed that it's hard to know what to believe and what not, but it really sends, chills down people who haven't worked in a long time.
I think the plant reopening, as you all heard in the beginning, it was a GM plant that closed in 2008 after the economic downturn, and then lay fallow for about 6 years, I think, until the chairman came in and bought the plant and put hundreds of millions of dollars into the plant. And so some of the GM workers came back, like Bobby and others and Jill, and so they're, and many people have been out of work for, a couple of years. So, it's in some ways was a real blessing that the chairman came and made that investment in Dayton and in the, ironically in the GM plant making auto glass for GM cars now. So it's, you said when we were speaking earlier about in some parts of America that we've become a low-wage country, and that really stuck with me, and I just hope people have work and dignity and all the things you talked about, Susan, as we go forward.
And we have a final question in the center of the house.
Great, thank you. I really enjoyed the film. I have a question, and I'd like a clarification, if you could, of something toward the end. I noticed in a couple of the scenes, including one with the chairman, toward the end, we saw the people ruminating, and then there were subtitles. And I was really curious if the chairman, at a different time, made that disclosure about when he's depressed, he thinks, is he part of the problem or solution? I'm paraphrasing. So I'd be curious about putting words next to people who are in thought or contemplating. The other thing was at the end, the Chinese manager, I thought I saw him with his kids, and I wasn't sure if that was in the United States or back in China, but I was definitely curious. I get that cultures are different and sacrifices are different, and I just wasn't sure if I saw that correctly or not. So those are my questions. Thank you.
The second question, Wong's family did come to America, I think, but it was after a year and a half or 2 years. So the watermelon eating scene was his wife and children in his apartment. The first one, I probably don't.
I wish Julie and Steve were here with us, because that line is quite remarkable when the chairman, after he's been to the Buddhist temple, says, I've created all the, have I harmed the environment, and I've, created all these factories, and, am I a contributor or a criminal? And, my gosh, you wonder if you'd ever hear an American CEO say
the Wong
those
family
words.
or the Koch brothers.
And, actually, it's funny, because a couple hours ago, I was talking to Julia about the exact translation of that phrase. And I told her that I strongly would consider the word criminal probably not appropriate for that context. It was probably much more of a sinner translation. So it's in that spiritual realm rather than kind of like in our strict legal sense, like guilty or innocent. So that was kind of my conversation with Julia like a few hours ago.
So a contributor or a sinner.
Correct.
As opposed to a criminal.
Exactly. But I mean, literal translation is criminal. However, in that context, in the Chinese language, I don't think it's appropriate to translate it strictly in that sense.
Well, I believe that's all we have time for. So Susan, Rebecca, Julie, thank you so, so much for your incredible work on this film, for your work on workers' rights. Thank you all for staying with us and being a part of this Take Action Day.
And thank you, Nico, for moderating.
Thank you, Nico.
Thank you.